View to the Insights Lecture Series for 2019. We've made it again. I am Brent Stickles. I'm a partner with Yes, and I am AIGA Minnesota's liaison to the Walker Art Center for the Insights Lecture Series. Over 3 decades ago, AIGA partnered with the Walker to create Insights, and every March since then, we have brought the world's most adventurous design thinkers and makers right here to the Twin Cities and onto this stage for this series. And so we're really honored and we're really proud of that partnership, and we're happy to be doing that once again this year. AIGAminnesota.org is where we have a ton of events and a ton of things going on at the chapter. I'm sure there's a lot of members here and you guys know what's going on. A quick recap, there's a cocktail networking event coming up this Thursday. We just opened registration for Portfolio One-on-One, which is the premier portfolio review event that happens. Students get to sit down with professionals, get your book reviewed. Registration is just opened. We always need professional reviewers. And we also have a special thing going on. We need people to sponsor students as part of our diversity and inclusivity initiative. We're looking for professionals to sponsor students to come to this who might not otherwise be able to come up with the admission price. If you're interested in that, talk to me after the event or talk to Heather Olson, who's around here. She's right there. And let us know. The deadline for this is tomorrow. We need your commitment by tomorrow so we can start getting some students together for this who otherwise wouldn't have this opportunity. And the last event I want to mention, there's an event coming up at the end of this month, March 28th, a business conversation series with a guy named Brent Stickles. I've got to put a plug in for that. But with all that said, again, thank you for being here for Part of Insights. Hello to our viewing, streaming audience out there. And please welcome my friend and partner in high crimes and misdemeanors, Emmett Byrne, director of the Walker Art Center. Design director.
Design director. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Thanks for braving the weather. Thank you, Brent, and thank you to AIGA Minnesota. 33 years is a super long time for a series to exist, and so I'm really proud to be able to work with it right now, and thank you all for coming out. I'd also like to thank, and I might have to read this, but I want to thank 10,000 Design this year for sponsoring the series, and that has been super valuable to us. So thank you, Ed Bennett, and your guests who you have here tonight as well for your support. It means the world to us, so thank you guys. I'd also like to thank Shapko Printing, who donates the poster, the printing of the poster every year. They're a fantastic partner to us. I'd also like to thank Ryan Gerald Nelson, who is our senior designer who designed the identity this year. I gave him a very open brief, so apparently what you're seeing is the epitome of good design to Ryan. So if you have any feedback for him, you can see him afterwards. He loves feedback, as all designers do. And then just really quickly, the Q&A session, we're really excited for your questions. For the Q&A, there will be ushers running around with the microphones, and we want to capture your questions for the live stream. So please raise your hand, and an usher will come find you and give you a microphone, and then they will direct Forrest to you. So for tonight's speaker, Forrest Young is a futurist at heart, with a designer's eye for craft and conceptual thinking. In the course description for the future design class that he teaches at CCA, he lists a variety of subject matters, from technology to ecology, history to the body, and he suggests that all of these topics represent potential future design practices just waiting to be invented, and not simply topics that warrant research. This active philosophy in which everything is waiting to be inhabited with purpose, from client briefs to universal design problems, is what Forrest brings to everything he does. Currently, he is global principal and head of design for Wolff Olins, the acclaimed branding firm which was recently named one of the most innovative companies of 2018 by Fast Company. When he's not working with global brands such as Uber, Apple, and Microsoft, Forrest is writing on design. He's serving as an MFA critic in the graphic design program for Yale University, where he is an alumni. He's teaching on the future of design, and he's also sometimes serving on the board of directors for AIGA New York. Which is like, are they enemies or are they friends? I'm not sure. He has spoken around the world for organizations such as South by Southwest, Design Thinkers, and Adobe. His work has been exhibited at such institutions as MoMA, the Royal College of Art, and international biennials. He's also won both the Gold Design Lion Award at Cannes and the Art Directors Club Black Cube Award. So I'm super excited to have him with us. Please welcome Forrest Young.
So just a pro tip, never end on a words in your bio. It's just so weird. It's like a weird humble brag. I'm so happy to be here. Hold on, let me get my mic on. Hold on. Oh my gosh, there's a mouse in here. All right, so 12-12, and I really am looking forward to the Q&A, so don't feel at all like, oh, I have this question, but I don't want to ask him this old design smurf on stage. But I'm design smurf. I dress in a cute little blue getup, so you'd feel like any question would be okay, like a little smurf village. So 12-12 is just a simple little title here, and I want to thank everyone for having me. So hello, Minnesota. I can't believe that I'm here in Minneapolis. I'm like one of the biggest Prince fans ever, and I feel kind of just humble to be here. I've tweeted that. I kind of exhausted that. These are our kind of social handles. Feel free to give us some love if you want. So this was the mic check. This is supposed to be slide 2, but this is the mic check 1 2 1 2, which is actually a song. So nice shout out to the Ultramagnetic MCs. Cool, Keith. So a very simple title. 12 curiosities and 12 pursuits. I try not to overthink my curiosities. I just try to just go after them and pursue them. And I think all my work speaks to the fact that I try to just cultivate immense curiosity about the world. And ultimately, I try to make other people curious about other people maybe that aren't themselves. One of my favorite quotes and stories is this story and parable of the blind monks that encounter an elephant. And in some ways, I kind of view this to be the totality of design, of which I am, just barely skimming the surface. And the story goes that these 7 monks encounter the elephant, and one is, of course, around the elephant's tummy and says, "Oh my goodness, it's a magnificent boulder." Another one is encircling the leg, and they said, "Oh, it's a mighty tree trunk." Another one is holding the trunk of the elephant. They said, "Oh, it's a boa constrictor. For sure, it's a boa constrictor." And they all start arguing because they're all holding some type of partial truth. So it's amazing to be here at venues like this. We're going to have a conversation about what the total shape of this elephant is, and hopefully I can share some insight into maybe some aspects, like the toenail or like the tusk, I don't know, like that I've experienced. So this is a shout out to Experimental Jet Set, which was my first, I think, Design Insight lecture series that I saw, and I was blown away by the fact that they had so much respect for what came before, and ultimately the name of their lecture was called Friendly Ghosts. So my ghosts are arcade ghosts. That's my story. This is me just waiting for Quirk to be developed, and in design, I was already like mobile first, digital first. You see, there's no paper, there's no physical media. I was just getting my thumb strength up because I knew I was going to do a lot of tapping as an adult. Of course, just practicing laying on of hands. If anyone's sick, just feel free to come up to the stage. Now, my mother was an amazing programmer and educator, and this is one of her drawings. So I grew up with my mother making these beautiful little glyphs for Atari at the Atari Cambridge Research Laboratory. And if you get any of you guys that are old enough to remember the turtle, like what a turtle was, I mean, it's just like, I just feel like a dinosaur, like, Anyway, so what's amazing about the turtle is you could reskin it. It's like a spotlight with different gels. You could say, I want the turtle to look like a person. I want the turtle to look like a spaceship. And I think it started to give me the ability to see things that were behind things, just a little bit. I wasn't conscious of it at the time. This is my dad, I think circa 1967 on the Dartmouth basketball team. I'm sure that was a very interesting experience. I always ask him, what it was like to be on that team. Now, the funniest story about this photo is my dad is number 11, but number 10, the guy that looks just like the happiest person in the entire photo, is the father of one of my students at the MFA program at Yale. So it's just unbelievable that our paths would cross. Surprise, surprise, the design smurf came from that little goober up there. And I was lucky enough to get to walk on the stage in graduation. My mom took me up there. This is her getting her Harvard diploma. And as a single mother, it was amazing getting up there and shaking hands and seeing the whole pageantry. So I've been surrounded by love and magic my entire life. Thank you so much for that. I was like, are they going to give me a laugh on this slide? I think, I asked, what was the first, idea that you had that you might be a designer? And I can't say that it was this exact thought, but I remember going to the jet bridge, I think it was Lindbergh Field in San Diego, and I saw a smiling plane. And I think I had like an out-of-body experience. I couldn't believe that a plane could smile. It's one of these simple things, and I know it's just a black stripe around the nose, but this was incredibly powerful. I suddenly felt excited to go on this plane just because it was smiling at me. And I thought, wow, the power of that little black line on the nose. Also, just seeing that no one goes through life alone and no one succeeds alone. So this is a wonderful telegram sent from Fellini to Kubrick, encouraging him to keep making amazing films. And specifically, he said, I saw your film yesterday and I need to tell you my emotion and my enthusiasm. I wish you the best luck in your path. And how special that must have been. So ultimately, I think we all need to be critical around these narratives that we encounter. They could be academic narratives. They could be narratives that you're learning in classrooms. They'd be narratives or mythologies that you're inheriting. I think ultimately, these perspectives are deceitful because they have agendas. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is how do we start to hack through these agendas to define our own path? So this little shout to the purple one up there. So to hack. And so ultimately, similar to Sarah's kind of actions to define oneself, these are kind of strategies or tactics that I've used to discover, like, what does it mean to hack? Do I know how to hack? Well, and this is kind of a foray into this exploration. So my father was very active in the civil rights movement and actually brought Stokely Carmichael, which was then his name, up to Dartmouth at the time to teach the folks up in Hanover a little bit about what was happening down in the South. So you got to imagine, when I saw this Paul Rand book cover, I said, oh my gosh, yeah, he's clearly like a civil rights movement, clearly like, African-American, side profile, soapbox, getting people right up on the street. And I wrote my admissions essay to Yale about Paul Rand being an African-American culture hero. And I know that they didn't know if I was being ironic, that I was very confused, if I was going to immediately just get cut. But I think that they were so perplexed by the fact that, one of the most famous people ever to come through the program to teach was not who I thought he was. And I would later write about this, right? Paul Rand is an African-American culture hero for a white Zinfandel. So if you happen to pick up this issue, read it. It's a black man's playground, clearly. Corporate identity, design. So this is a little kind of snapshot into my, my experience at Yale. I think I was lucky enough to have an amazing cohort of people. Eric Adelson, Titus Kaffar, who just won the MacArthur Genius Grant. A thesis show that almost killed us, literally, trying to hang 10,000 sheets of 8.5 by 11, which was a kind of a conversation around the comp and constraints and how we shift the meaning of one's work through the constraints that we have to inhabit. And this was my poster, my initial hack at a photo seating. So the photo, I think this is for the, it was a photo lecture in the graphic design atrium. And I thought, well, if they're going to put chairs in our atrium, I should just make a poster for Irma Bloom out of it. And I think one of the great lessons, and this was actually a lesson that Tobias Jones taught me, which is this notion of multi-stable perception. And very simply, this is a Necker cube. So probably some percentage of the audience is seeing a downward-facing cube, while the other half is seeing an upward-facing cube, and there's no right answer. And this idea of multi-stability was incredibly interesting to me. Another way to say it, I don't care if she's a tape dispenser, I love her. And I can kind of I could feel like on that snail on the left. I feel like that has been my path in design. It's like, that's not a snail, but kind of close enough. So similar to the snail on the left, I chose to see the world as something that could be negotiated, altered, shifted. So when I saw this, don't walk sign, I thought, oh my gosh, it's somebody asking me to high five it, saying, please high five me. This is just a gesture of celebration, not of caution. And so I created an alter ego called the Red Hero in graduate school, which is really about me overcoming my fears. I think some sprained ankles and some ill-advised falls, a lot of physical comedy, like doing that rail slide in icy weather, or just jumping backwards off of a 25-foot retaining wall. And these are the types of things that I said, how does one become fearless? How does one actually intentionally go out into the world and, essentially walk backwards for 3 blocks? And a shout out to Jeff Hahn, who is the videographer on that center frame. Very, very steady. So steady that he didn't warn me that there was a car that was about to hit me. He's like, I couldn't ruin the shot. It was one take. And how do we see things that are forgotten or underutilized as opportunities to say, hey, what about these underserved communities? What about women in the architecture school? And so this is actually a project where we taped neon tape in every crevice, every crack, every moment where the architecture school was essentially shaded or cracks or kind of unnegotiated spaces. And the then dean of the Yale School of Architecture said, excuse me, sir, what are you doing to my steps? And I just went, and I think he was just so scared, he just kept walking. And just shout out to Rebecca Jimenez, who helped me tape this brutalist building. So then 3 years, amazingly formative. And again, when I looked again at Keedy Sands, I said, oh my gosh, this was just silhouettes of Swiss Army knives. And of course, he emailed me and he said, Swiss Army knives? Are you kidding me? That's like the Pomo nightmare. And so ultimately, how do we see something like OCR and hacker language? So there is a thing called LEET 1337, right? And so how do we use LEET speak to actually create a logo for the National Grid for an issue on a hacking syndicate? How do we create typography for Cooper Union for all those brave people who are saying that education should be free and school and free are inseparable? They're one and the same. And how architecturally could this typography have the same actual members? How do you create a clock from a very, very long street crossing sign? I mean, it took me 56 seconds to cross it, but that's just because I just did it with a little bit of swagger. But I think it might have been near like a nursing home. But anyway, it counted up to a full 60. And so I thought, oh my gosh, rather than counting down, if I count up, I can make a digital clock. So this is actually in the MoMA Talk to Me show, which actually kind of hooked up to a clock feed, and it controlled the video footage of a traffic light, called Angelus Novus, so obviously an homage to Benjamin, which is, does progress happen walking forward, or progress most likely is happening where you're walking backward and you're referencing things that you're seeing as known points. You're actually backing into something that you can't see, which is, I think, a truer depiction of the future. How do we see tiles as pixels, and how do we understand that the whole space around us is an interface? And I think there's a lot of talk about, well, in the real world, it's like in the real world, it's like these hands. And I like to say, it's just the same world, so clearly you can see the extension of the bathroom experimentation and tile work and the Cartoon Network. So who's not to say you can do a global, television rebrand and still utilize the same learnings of how all these pieces snap together? Why not create a world defined by a three-dimensional grid with a cube moon? So when I saw this invitation by Daniela Spinat, I couldn't believe it, because I thought, wow, this is such fresh typography. The idea that creases could actually be the typographic letter forms, the spans, so subtle. And I was just curious whether or not this could be done with negative space. And this is for the AICP's new initiative called the Next Awards. And so I thought, okay, if you fold a square piece of paper, maybe that diagonal could look like an N, an E, an X, and a T, but let's see how it works. So adding a little bit of color to improve the legibility. But ultimately, this is the first time that I built something that was intended to move, like I was building a machine that had hinges and parts. This is hands down like the most amazing screen I presented in front of them. I'm trying not to look at it and read out the screen, but the fidelity of the screen is just exceptional. So thank you, Eric Adelson, for bringing me into the Cartoon Network. That was a very special project that proved that the real world is just the same world. How do you use design to instruct, right? So my favorite instance of this is Joseph Hartwig's, Bauhaus chess set, where unbelievably so, every chess piece communicates how the piece moves, right? So the castle communicates north, east, west, south, how it moves. Right, the bishops are diagonals, and the queen is omnidirectional. It's a sphere. I thought, wow, it's so amazing that the instruction of how to play chess is encoded in the piece itself. Right, they're not just they're emblems of a knight. They're actually the formations and the flows. And so I thought, how would I do this for the Orlando Museum of Art? What if it's just a series of triangles, maybe infinite triangles that are spinning that form an A, or no, two that come together to form somewhat like an M, an A, OMA. Then playing around with confusing the language of analog and digital, right? Hypertext link. Could it be instructive on how color combines? Combining, traditional kind of color combinations, how light combines, how pigments combine, even an homage to Goethe's color wheel. Bless you. And how do we even see, looking around at models again, now we can't help but see OMA, even though that wasn't the intention of the shoot at all. Or that, men's and women's are just the same symbol, just flipped upside down or bidirectional. And thank you, Mark Unger, for bringing me into that project and for hiring me. Now for a pivot. I think there's something very special in the audience. Greg heard. How do you go from a telephone company to really an entertainment platform? It's quite a major pivot since this is the company that invented telephony. And so piece by piece, we thought about how does blue represent the color of potential, the color of possibility. It's an ocean, it's a sky, it's just limitless, boundless. And that's the space of connectivity. But how do we start to then parse out what is a passive entertainment experience versus what is an active experience where we're trying to do something and accomplish something to something that is somewhere in between? And how do we possibly program the world's largest television? So thank you, Greg Hurd. Now, how do we rewrite something? And this is one of my favorite quotes, which is, you write in order to change the world. And that sounds like a massive seismic shift. How could a designer possibly do such things? But he says, even by a millimeter. And so it becomes, okay, well, I can do a millimeter. That's something that's within my realm. The way people look at reality, and then you can change it. Very similar to Bucky Fuller's notion of the trim tab. Right? If you're trying to turn a giant ship, it's not about grabbing the rudder and turning the ship. It's not about even thinking of the rudder. It's about the trim tab that's on the rudder that creates those little micro movements. So when we look at someone like Admiral Perry, we think of all these great instances where somebody has said, I have summited, Mount Everest, Edmund Hillary. I have been the first to the North Pole. And there's always somebody who has to hold the camera. This is always what I love. There's somebody taking the picture, which means there's somebody else who has also summited who is not getting their picture taken. I think it's just an important thing to remember as we start to look at, these types of artifacts that we encounter. And so what about this guy, Matthew Henson? This was the guy who was out there and he was getting the sleds and training the dogs. And so Travar Strawn says, I'm just going to rewrite this history. I'm actually going to take on this challenge of Perry and Henson and their narrative and their history. And so he says to me as I'm graduating, I said, what are you doing? Everyone says, I'm going to New York City. What are you doing? I'm going to New York City. What are you doing? I'm going here and then I'm going to New York City. Okay, great. That sounds pretty interesting. And I said, Tavares, what are you doing? He says, I think I'm going to have to go back to the North Pole. What? He says, yeah, but I probably need a flag if I'm going up to the North Pole. It's like, you definitely need a flag. I mean, first things first, you get your picture taken, you got to plant a flag. That's like summiting 101. So I took Admiral Perry's flag, I replaced the P with the T, and it now is in the Bahamian colorway. And that went up to the North Pole. Thank you, Tavares. So how do we open something that is becoming closed? When we think of the Internet of Things and walled gardens and all these tech companies that are vying for winner takes all. And it's important to then back out and say there's so many opportunities where we had, VHS versus beta, a base 10 type of math, a base 12 type of math, a base 20 type of math. And so I looked at all these systems of approaching what is an Internet of Things that is a universal language, like Esperanto, all these attempts to create universality in the way we can communicate. And I particularly fell in love, I have a love for base 12, so of course the Mayans were base 20, but that's okay. Because what I loved about base 12 is that the glyph looked like hardware and software and two devices connecting over radio. And then someone said, yeah, but it looks like a face. Do not present to engineers and say it's a face. Please, no face. No one can say it's a face. First thing the CEO said, it's a face. I like it. I like faces. Okay, great. One of the things we realized is you could actually send this logo through SMS with a colon and two posts. So to truly democratize what a logo or identity system even is. right? It's not that you have to have an EPS file or access to a gated portal. This is essentially, I'm texting to a friend who's getting lost in the kind of Internet of Things section of Best Buy. What do I look for? Target, Best Buy, because the people sometimes are not even knowledgeable. So just look for this sign. This is the glyph of reassurance. ... There you go, the face at the end. And a nice nod to how much China was adopting smart home technology, right? So you kind of have a little bit of a right to left read. So rather than putting the glyph to the left of the word mark, it exists to the right of the word mark, almost like a kind of a emoji-like accentuation. What's nice about this, partnering with Google Fonts, of course, is an open font license. The logo lived in a code repository, not a branded portal. And it was communicated by the Zigbee Alliance, who was pushing for an open agenda for the IoT. But we didn't stop there. What does openness feel like? If a ... mobile picks you up in your Vegas hotel. ... here's gonna pick you up. Of course, I would have amazing internet and connectivity and mesh networks. And this beautiful off-the-grid residence with partnership with IKEA, all this beautiful smart home technology that's ambient. A nice little pool for the kids. And just demonstrating that this is a dynamic code-based identity system. So here you see dynamic adjustments in the CSS, adjusting size and scale. This is how this code could be forked or altered.
There's something you should know. Your toaster has a burning desire to talk to your espresso machine.
I also want to talk to the
But
espresso
something
machine.
doesn't translate. They need ... the universal language for smart things everywhere. See, right now, the smart stuff in your life is busy learning your language. But to really deliver the breakfast, they need to talk amongst themselves. Because when they do, everything gets better. Shoppers can buy what they want and know it'll ... Manufacturers can rest assured it's ... and done. And developers can find new ways for all kinds of objects to ... Transforming the way we play, work, and live. Look for ... by Zigbee Alliance, coming soon.
And the amazing thing about this project is that was an amazing film by Hunter Gatherer and Todd St. John. And the fact that to ... something is to give it eyes became a whole new creative potential in terms of the space. Oh, so a toaster doesn't have eyes, so it can't see the espresso machine. The espresso machine can't see the toaster. So ultimately, this idea of ... means to see and hear and understand the world around you, which was a great discovery for us. And thank you, Freddie Phillips, those amazing renders. And ultimately, you must always do what is right. And I think these are the things that push us along into more interesting briefs that may be testing and trying. So I think of stereotype. It's amazing because a stereotype has origins in printing, right? So if you think about metal movable type, and you're trying to think of the fastest way to create a book, you create an entire book plate spread at once. That's a stereotype, right? So we have origins of this phrase that come from printing. When we look at Neuland inline at the top or chop suey at the bottom, we see, okay, that typography can be used to abbreviate the types of ways in which people express themselves. And how can we be more vigilant when we go into a bookstore and we see typeface reminds us of American Spirits, of Early Crocs, of Jumanji, of Jungle Fever, all these types of things that are communicative of other. Now, how do we remember? So, amazing story. Muhammad Ali commissions Flip Schulke to photograph him underwater. So Flip Schulke says, this is going to be a very difficult shoot. Muhammad Ali says, you got to do it. I'm Muhammad Ali. Cool. So he's underwater, shadowboxing. A year later, Flip Schulke sees him, and Ali just winks at him. And he just says, what was that wink for? He says, I can't swim. But I wanted people in the ring to think that I had some training methods that were so crazy that when they got in the ring with me, they'd be like, he's training underwater. There's no way I'm going to even get past the second round. And this idea of how a ring and how a space defines you ultimately was the communicative idea for creating a commemorative poster for Nelson Mandela. And so the limitations were that the poster had to be A2. But amazingly so, we had an amazing intern, Annalisa, who said, why don't we create the totality of the footprint of his cell in Robben Island? So the poster unfolds the exact dimensions of his cell in Robben Island to show that light can triumph in the darkest spaces. How can we reduce? Okay, not that type of reduce, not like shrink. This is a lovely gift from someone who said, okay, you're doing the yellow pages. Here's the smallest yellow pages you're ever going to see. Thank you, Matt Van Leeuwen. And we thought, okay, yellow pages are all about fields of yellow. It's like diving into a yellow swimming pool. But ultimately, how do we get more intentionality to what type of yellow? Is it kind of like we kind of see a line amidst a field of yellow? Or is it such specific yellow? We said, okay, it's maybe like how we think of a highlighter. We don't highlight the entire page, we only highlight the most important thing. So we would highlight the spritz coming from the spray bottle, or the water at the base of a ladder, or the top button, or the garnish, or the front wheel, or the light coming from the light bulb. Which then creates the idea for the system. It's just the underline, it's the highlight, it's the strike through, it's all the signals and the ticks that we use to get things done. How does this translate into digital? How does this translate onto a bus? And it's an actual bus. I was like, wow. So usually these are mock-ups. It's like, oh, okay, I have to put it on the bus mock-up. That's a bus, an actual bus. The nice little blurry NYC logo, courtesy of Jordan Crane on that taxi, but you can't see it. Thank you, Kathy Keene. Well, how do we think about saving the planet and crazy ideas like that? And I just love this, Andrew Lewis comic. No, I'm afraid you have humans. He's like, oh no, I'm gonna die. So an amazing project led by Jordan Crane, which ultimately was about answering the impossible brief, literally. We had a founder who said, I want to change the way the Earth looks in outer space, so that in 10 years, 20 years, my kids tell me, oh wow, we now have the same amount of water in the oceans, or we have the same amount of land mass. And that was the challenge. So the actual identity system represents the blue of the ocean and the color ascribed to each of the continents. And so ultimately the logo is a reminder of we're actually designing the planet we live on by the food we consume, ultimately opening up potentially $1 trillion plant-based meat industry. And a lovely notion that I got from Ratna Desai, who's head of product at Netflix. And she said, when astronauts often land on the moon, they talk about this thing called the overview effect. When you actually see the Earth from a distance, you start to see all the partitions, the boundaries dissolve, and you feel this overwhelming sense of love of humanity, because you can't actually see the partitions anymore. So how do we inspire and encourage this overview effect in all the things that we do? So thank you, JC. And how do we, okay, first of all, how many people know what this is? I love it. So this is like my favorite creature ever. It's called a tardigrade, and it is a micro animal, and it is impossible to kill. They have frozen these things, they have dehydrated them, they have put these things in the vacuum of space, and they simply will not die. And so I met somebody in a company who said, oh yeah, the tardigrade, we were the first company to sequence the tardigrade. And what we need you to do is, what we're doing is applying machine learning to high throughput experimentation to bring about an industrial renaissance. He said, we're so far beyond biotech that we're dealing in edge case complexity that we first need to tell us what category we're even in. Because we're ultimately, hopefully, going to genetically edit microbes that could feed on plastic in the oceans to get into true climate engineering. I thought, oh my goodness, this may be the most important brief I've ever received as a human. And so more and more we start to see brands that are actually struggling, contesting with these biological functions and human functions and macro forces. Netflix encouraged you to watch those 3 extra episodes, right, rather than get the much needed sleep that you probably need. Or Airbnb, dealing with the human nature. Is this person gonna be a guest in my home? So the true market potential of all these companies are human limitations. They're not actually competitive forces. And so Zymergen said, we're competing against human ego. The human arrogance of a lab tech, or someone who says, well, I have the right hypothesis, and all the people in my lab need to follow my lead. And they said, let's just let the computers figure it out, of course within certain moral boundaries. And so we started to script, notional headlines. Zymergen is a molecular technology company, an emerging titan at the forefront of an industrial renaissance. What does industrial renaissance mean? Shh, don't tell me. And they said the industrial nature, the material nature of the world hasn't changed since 1970. We had an information revolution, but we're still dependent on fossil fuels. We'll start trying to eke out the last 7% of what we can deal with in plastics. And so they want to actually do that for the genome. They believe that's the future of our planet. And so how do we unify the three aspects of their story, right? Biotech would have two, but they would have machine learning, high throughput experimentation, industrial renaissance. Oh, it's kind of like a Jacob's ladder, right? It's a three-part Z. And we thought, well, we can't just choose ordinary colors, like what's the hex value and what's the RGB? What are the material properties of these colors? So we looked at, IKB, right? The color of a person. We looked at Baragon pink, that amazing, pink that's it's like a Pepto-Bismol, but peppy. It's just so beautiful. I highly recommend everybody go to Mexico City at some point. Larry Butler, the chroma key green. So if you want to reimagine the space around you, then you can project it. Cosmic latte, which apparently, according to Carl and Ivan, is the true color of the universe. And so we had to create posters for events that are probably 5 years out, 3 years out, but to try to show them this is what your category looks like. The new Zymergen. And the Jacob's Ladder echoes these little armatrons. These are how the robots actually were doing all their manual pipetting. And then partnerships with esteemed institutions like the D School. Security badge and potential product lines. And this is very fun. So we had a chance of basically kind of test driving this mark as a always on, always dynamic kind of aperture with that Jacob's Ladder movement that's opening up new types of material possibilities. Using all these colorways to talk about materials that we haven't even seen or understood. Like, what is the new Kevlar? Thank you, Taylor Simpson, that was his route. And now into Wolff Olins. So a lot of those were kind of steps up to Wolff Olins, and I feel like I would not have been ready for Wolff Olins at any time sooner than having done these projects. And I think, McKinsey, who we actually just rebranded and launched globally, said we're a fusion of math and magic. So kind of similar to the love and magic from earlier, from slide 4. And so these people, who are these people we keep hearing about, either at the center of controversy, that run towards these briefs that no one else will take, that have a near certain chance of failure, but ultimately seem to be towards some greater good. And of course, one of the first clients were the Beatles for Apple Records. I think we're the only company that has done both apples. And so ultimately thinking about how branding exists, this new continuum. So if you think about, the Hermes, horse saddle that eventually becomes, like a Birkin bag, or you think about, Bowerman's waffle iron, that was about physical craft. And that physical craft that needs a signal to differentiate, the Nike from the Adidas, right, from the Pumas. And so then, of course, you pay Carolyn $37, the cheapest logo ever gone in macro scale. But then you need to stand for something bigger than a signal, right? That's just a sticker, that's just a glyph. How do you stand for athletic empowerment? For the tagline, just do it. And everyone's got a body as an athlete, to a platform that's stitching together data and behaviors and activities, ultimately to owning particular contexts. I wake up in the morning and it's Nike Training Club. Wednesday night, Nike Running. And so ultimately, Wolff Olins, doesn't change the world, but they partner with people that do. And I think it's evident in a lot of the company that we keep. And a lot of these were very controversial, right? The 2012 Olympics, we had to have security detail for the design team. There were so many, there were actually death threats against the team. Or the Met, of course, like who didn't write something about the Met? I think it's interesting to be at the center of something that's like still forming, right? Something that's so nascent that it's you don't know if it's good. But you have to have conviction. You have to believe there must be a better way. And I think because it's this marriage, this blended, kind of cut through thinking with kind of expression, we've been noted. As Emmett mentioned, the most innovative company for design for 2018 and Cannes Lions. But I think ultimately it's not about designing a vacuum, right? Because those wouldn't lead to transformative designs. They wouldn't be holistic. And so lastly, how do we reimagine how the world moves? So of course, a very easy brief. And one of the things with Uber was trying not to get sucked into how we move today. Right? It's like, where's my car that's going to take me to my destination? It's like, where's my flying car that I'm walking into on my skyport in LA on my way to LAX to fly over the 405? And so how do we start to create these artifacts that push us to think about the future so we don't get locked into near-term solutions?
Not only is the U.S. State Department freshening up their look, Uber is doing that too. Uber unveiled a new logo yesterday. I don't know if you noticed, but this was their old logo, and this is the new logo. I have to say, I kind of respect it when people don't try at all. The crazy thing is they say it took them 9 months to create this logo. I think that was too long. You know what takes 9 months to make? A baby, a human baby. Now, it took Uber 9 months to type 4 letters and pick a font.
Awesome. that was a high point. It's something like just getting just roasted by Kimmel, just like, and everyone's like, ha ha ha. And it's like, come on guys, be strong. So the first thing we had to do is say, what type of movement are you? They go, well, we haven't thought about that yet. Are you like a creative type of movement where I move across the stage? Hold on, let's see if I can do this. Are we a type of social organization towards a common goal? Are we a tight synchronicity, or are we a frictionless type of movement? Nope. We are a coyote with a giant magnet attached to our waist. And a shout out to the AIGA company for their product placement. Now, we can't tell whether or not he's pulling the world towards him or he's being pulled towards his destination. It was that type of movement, that bi-directional type of movement that, is he summoning food or is he traveling? And it wasn't movement that's saying you have to go somewhere, because that'd be like airline movement, right? Get there. And so Paul Clay says a line is a dot that went for a walk. He said a circle is a square that went for a little spin. So this starts to inform the origins of the language, where you look at shapes as being polymorphic, not as the triangle EPS or the circle EPS. A square that spins becomes a circle. A square that folds becomes a triangle. A square that extends becomes a line. A line that spins becomes a circle. And they're all one and the same. And you can actually see this in the app, which is really, really lovely. Early sketches about how we start to bring this to life. We spent a lot of time on the computer. There's so much pixel pushing. I think what's so important with projects like this is sometimes you just have to get away from the computer and you have to look at the basic type of understanding of driver and rider, moments of surprise and delight. Or most importantly, back to the coyote, it's not just about leaving, it's about returning. We want to come home again, we want to return to work. And how does the platform understand what's most important to us? A very, very small space. We call this guy the Muscle Shoals recording studio. Very, very fragrant in there, but a lot of work done. Using a collaborative platform, NICE, which allowed us to basically put really, really raw sketches next to ready-made objects. And I think one of the things I try to tell my team is just not to get sucked into this, the seduction of mood boarding, of looking at and copying, because things are just so influential. How do you actually start to sketch with Sharpies or with scissors, and then ultimately understand things by looking at things in juxtaposition? So this is the big aha moment. 11:46 p.m., presentation the next day, huge presentation. And I'm putting this keynote file of a diver, and it snaps to the top middle of this screen. And all of a sudden, it kind of universally go, oh my gosh, there's a giant U. Oh my gosh, a giant U. And like the designer's like, it's a giant U. I'm sure if anybody heard us, they'd be like, those people are absolutely insane. But we're like, oh my gosh, this is like our version of the FedEx era, right? It's focusing on the thing that you should be focusing on, which is the person, and the company actually recedes as it should, and it has this generous embrace. And so from that point, we just let the system design itself, and we try to get out of the way. And over time, we got comfortable putting content in the U-frame itself to communicate those kind of contextual details and textures. And looking at all the nexus points, what is the easiest way for you to touch an app, know where to stand? I mean, where do you stand in the airport? That's a deal. And then ultimately know that you have a trade dress that's easy to see. And one of the things that came out of looking at a lot of transportation signage was immediacy. It's not about trying to be someone's best friend. Hey, I see you're traveling to Delhi. Da, 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 da. It's like, I just need to go there. I just need to go to the airport. I don't want to talk to you. I just want to go to the airport. And so how do we just understand that sometimes the most generous thing to do is just to help people, right? It's not about being loved and having kind of a reciprocal interaction. And thinking about all the wealth of transportation, whether it's different glyphs, phonetic alphabets, and an homage to all the great type designers that were working either for transportation or communicating things about making incredibly legible typography. And what always happens is you design, like in the US, and then you go, oh no, there's like other countries besides the US. That's like the classic, like, it's like first it's like, what? Like the United States is in San Francisco? And then that's like the first thing. And then you're like, oh no, let's get out. There's the United States. And then there's like, oh my, there's like, wow. How do things enhance versus degrade? How do things get better when they leave the US versus fall down? So ultimately we looked at the relationship between Latin and Hindi Devanagari, and opportunities for languages to actually celebrate the beauty and the mechanics of how these are drawn. So this billboard, it's an actual billboard app shot in India. And I remember saying to Harmon, we have to shoot this out of home. And he goes, sure, no problem. So he's, woo, Tokyo Drift, side scoot in the middle of a 6-lane highway. All cars around us just swarming, but all under control. He says, no, we're in India. Everyone here knows how to drive. It's not like America. And then we went to Amsterdam. Patrick says, well, obviously we don't have billboards, so I don't know why you guys keep mocking up these billboards. We have bikes. We have lots and lots of bikes and canals and bikes and canals. So we had to think about branded functional objects. How does a U-frame become something meaningful to somebody who's on a bike? Right? Is it a pickup point for you to drop your bike off and then have a car to come pick you up, right? Just solve a purpose, right? Don't just decorate and litter. Or if you're in Old Delhi, you can't possibly fit one of those in Old Delhi, so you have to think about more ambient ways in which the U-frame can appear. And how do we extend typographic details into iconography? How do we make sure that everyone can see these colors? Right, so how do we make sure that accessibility contrasts for AA and AAA become things that everyone memorized? And so if we do have a color for safety, this safety blue, that's 4.58 to 1, see? Then it's clearly the color of the helmet, the color of the seatbelt, the color of the enclosure, the safe lock, the completion of the journey. How do we make people feel comfortable with this crazy technology, self-driving cars? Well, how do we start to infer that this car maybe has certain tendencies. This car is actually very, very knowledgeable, a particular museum route, right? And apologies for the Times Square mock-up. It's just like de facto like branding. It's like rarely do you ever take over Times Square, but it's like, wow, just really look the feel of that, just And so these were our guidelines. And again, you get to this point and you're just like really, really, really tired, and you just want to make a PDF and send it. And then when you've received a PDF that just sat on your desktop and you only looked at one page. So how do we start to make something that feels dynamic, that feels inviting, and that gets a sense of the timing and the animation, the gestural qualities of this brand? And then what rarely ever happens beyond the guidelines is that things look this good in the real world. So this is an actual out-of-home in Berlin. Paris Metro. And a nice little Romanian ad where clearly all you see are these two U's. And the content is, kind of secondary. Uber has totally embraced universal design. So this is one of their proudest accomplishments, this book called 77. And how do we paint a picture for 2026 on a skyport in Tokyo looking towards Mount Fuji? And how can we be so specific about details? The traffic cones over there on the left are the actual Mount Fuji traffic cones. That safety blue is the standing zone. That we've incorporated the typography and FAA standards in terms of skyport markings. That this would be a JA 1050 based on code. So all those details that make you believe that this could be real, they give you the confidence to move forward this. So Armin says it has the potential to be a case study we'll discuss 20 years from now, but of course, it's a conditional praise, right? As long as Uber delivers on the potential positive change. And now I feel like this is like the reel that blends myself, Wolff Olins, historical, and our path moving forward. Thank you, Brian, our chairman. Yeah, it's all about love. Another form of love that says me as a, as a Powerpuff Girl. No judgment there. I have a nice little boombox that's playing really nice music. And we're out of time, so now I'd love to just answer any Q&A, and don't be shy. Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks for a wonderful presentation. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about when you're looking at a brand, how much is of what you do is reflecting who they are today, and how much is aspirational?
That's a great question. I think more and more so, especially as more and more companies are becoming necessary tech companies. They're working against sometimes competing time horizons, right? Because you have product teams that are working in much longer time horizons, like 5 years and 10 years. You're doing product, and in marketing, you're dealing with either triage or near-term solutions. And so somewhere within a longer-term time horizon and a near-term solution is, to your point, authentic expression. And I think it's important to parse out what is internal politics and ultimately what is the salvageable essence of this is truly who the company is moving forward. And I think it's finding that right balance almost between those two corridors of what makes a company true.
How does Wolff Olins prepare a client for the public outrage of a new identity? And do you have a plan to address it in social media?
That is a fantastic question. One of the things is we've had such a history of kind of being at the center of controversy that in some ways it almost kind of self-selects the type of people that approach us for RFIs and RFPs. I think if that was not the case, that'd be a head scratcher. Because I think ultimately, if you're truly trading something that's transformative, right? Like London 2012 is the most successful Olympic Games of all time. And it's the most controversial Olympic logo of all time. So then the question is, well, what's controversial about it? It's maybe visually evocative or it feels sharp, but it was designed for youth. It wasn't designed for, the parents of those youth, because it was about embracing everyone's Olympics. And the attention paid to the Paralympics, which was ignored by every Olympics, this is the real Olympics, and this is like the lower tier Olympics. We embraced the Paralympics with even more vigor than regular Olympics, hence the ticket sales were amazing. So it was financially successful because there was a correct ethos in terms of the Olympics should be for everyone. But back to your point, we try to mark out, it's not enough to just deliver the assets. Like, how do we think about, one, talking to whether they're kind of a super panel of people in media to say, hey, sign this NDA and let's have a conversation about molecular technology. So we actually reached out to somebody at Popular Science and we said, molecular technology, does that sound stupid? And he said, well, it sounds kind of bland, but I like it. He says, it doesn't sound too edgy, like an overpromise, but it sounds like, you reminded him of Palantir. He said, it's something I kind of know, I don't really understand, I don't question it, and it has the right amount of distance. And so I think one is talking to people ahead of time that might be those types of people to write those, the Met articles, the logo looks like it's a traffic accident type of articles. But then ultimately to give the courage of our conviction, to our client partners. If they falter, if they're getting weak, we can say, I am 120% confident that this is going to work. And sometimes it's just I think our main delivery is courage and conviction more than it is assets.
This may be a little bit silly, but I'm hoping it gets to something more serious, which is, so you started with the airplane and the smile, which I've always loved. And then the Uber airplane has no smile. And somewhere in between, you talked about Uber not, doesn't need to be friendly. It just needs to get you where you're going. And I guess my question is a little bit about how much of that is responding to what you think Uber needs in their communications, and how much of that actually has to do with your own practice of not necessarily needing to be liked, but needing to put something out there?
I think it's a great question. I think one of the things that my tendency is, you see so many people doing it, like JetBlue is a classic example. They're looking at people at the ticket counters, and they were saying, okay, it's not about people being friendly at their ticket counter. the ticket counter is just never going to be a good time. It's just impossible to have a good time at a ticket counter. You get the friendliest person, like, oh, wow, I noticed you're wearing this. It's amazing. Your perfume smells amazing. And it's like, meow, crying baby behind you. It's like you just get people away from the ticket counter, resolve your tickets, at the comfort of your own home and go straight to the gate. And I think one is just understanding what people truly need, like what is salvageable. And back to the kind of the smile, one of the things that we've been talking about is, wow, the opportunities for a pilot of an eVTOL, which just means electric vertical takeoff and landing craft, is to be a tour guide. Who here has flown, low altitude at 2,000 feet, and all of a sudden the rooftops become a whole new vantage point? And I think for us, that's the new smile. Oh wow, it's a rooftop garden. Oh wow, we're going to commission a mural on the top. This is the new form of media and out of home are going to be underutilized rooftops as seen by low altitude aircraft. And so all of a sudden, everyone goes, oh my gosh, rooftops. And that's amazing. And so I think to your point about the smile or not to smile, it's like, what is the essence of the smile? Is the smile symbolic or is the smile experiential? And I think we're always trying to parse out that level of depth. It's a great question.
Hi, so when you're creating a project, be it a logo or branding or even like packaging, how do you really start? Do you look for inspiration? Or do you just like crack out an idea at a table with your team?
I think more and more so, we just talk. We just have a conversation. I almost think that there's this desire to, and I make this mistake all the time, is just jumping into software too soon or start sketching too soon. And oftentimes it's just hearing different people's opinions and voices and vantage points. Again, like the ... example where Todd St. John kind of came up with this idea of like to ... something is to give something the ability to see and hear. And that only would have happened through a conversation. In any amount of sketching, I never would have arrived at that discovery. And so I think we started with a conversation. The conversation leads to very, very lo-fi sketching, because I started to think that our tools are getting so good that our tools are pushing us into being copycats. Our tools are actually pushing us into, somebody was talking about this at Adobe, right? If you have a Starry Night filter, you're never going to be Vincent van Gogh. Right, so you have to find your own way to express that what you're experiencing. Your tools actually may be your worst enemy.
Hi, clearly you're incredible at selling design, which I think is a huge part of our industry and getting people to buy into what we're doing, because we can make something incredible, but if we can't sell it, it's all for naught. I am curious if you've ever had an extremely difficult client who just doesn't want to trust you on that journey and how you navigated that.
That's a fantastic question. So I tell people TTL, which is taste, trust, leave. So either the client partner has taste, in which you have a shorthand and a shared understanding of what you're talking about. Either they have trust, in which case they're saying, I trust you because I don't have the faculties to understand subjectively that this is beautiful or not. But if they don't have taste or trust, then you must leave. You must run very, very fast, because that's when you get I showed it to my dog and my dog was like, I don't like that type. It's like, what, you can't, what do you do with that? So I think that's important, and it's just to have those kind of parsing mechanisms. And the best piece of advice I ever had was somebody was talking about working at M&Co, and they said, how did Tibor Kalman sell them this very, crazy ideas, Florent. And he said, if you want to sell something, and this is like the thing I just almost like tell every person that works in my studio, is if you're trying to sell a red ball, the worst thing you can do is show a red ball. What you have to do is you have to show the value of red. You have to show you the value of a sphere over any other platonic solid. Why a sphere is reminiscent of the earth and the home that we live. Where the sphere is a perfectly, beautiful and kind of approachable shape versus, a cube, which is off-putting and sharp and edgy. And then of course you have red, which is a color of excitation and passion. It's a color that reminds me of being at the Walker and presenting. And then ultimately, the cognitive dissonance between those two competing things will fuse, and the person will actually see a red ball in their mind. And at that point, when you reveal the red ball, they go, that's exactly what I thought.
I want to go back to the courage and conviction comment that you made, and walking backward at 11:46 a.m. And all of those things really resonated. And I'm curious, where do you find the intersection of true insight and research, and where's their analysis paralysis, and how do you come through to the other side to really bring forward, when do those things all merge together, and how do you really wrap that up for your client?
Well, I think there's a kind of an elephant in the room, not the elephant that was in the presentation, but the elephant that is, we're starting to use terms as designers that are starting to not mean anything. Like, I actually don't know sometimes what people mean by empathy because we overuse it. Like, I actually don't know sometimes when people say insight. Like, insights are so rare. Like, a really great insight is like so rare. That's like got milk, like milk mustache. Like, when you deprive people of milk, they feel like, it's like, it's so rare, And so I think, like, what is an insight versus, a generalization? Like, what is, a smile versus a kind of experiential, kind of outcome? I think so. The first thing is for us to have the discipline to say, what is an insight versus what is the data telling us? Because if it's just the data, then it's a mirror. But an insight is like an emergence of something that was there all along, but you're finally seeing it in a particular way, in a particular angle that you understand, what to do with it. So I think that's the first thing. I think true insights often happen at the worst times. Like 11:46, the night before the biggest presentation, is the worst time to have an insight. To have the FedEx era moment happen. Everyone's like, yeah, or the moment everyone came down, everyone goes, oh my gosh, now we have to like basically stay here until the presentation. Because we're all so excited about this, now we have to sell this thing in. So this insight gave us basically a whole third route. And so I think, it's also having the excitement to say when an insight happens, it's just trust it and go with it. And it feels right. And usually it is a blend of kind of intuition where you start to see, oh, I have like 25 immediate ideas. And that's, for me, is the test of whether something is an insight, is all of a sudden when you can start to see faces inside of that, sliding U frame, you start to see it, going wide like a bracket. But if you can't see anything, then usually that means that it's not an insight, that I have to push a little bit further. This is the absolute best Q&A I've had in the last 2 years. This is the best screen I presented in front of, and easily the last 7 years. And this is the best venue in terms of the angle. I feel like I'm actually talking to you. It's not like it's like a vast ocean where it's like somewhere back in the Pacific Ocean. All right, one more.
So I guess this is more of a personal question.
Sure.
What's like your favorite part of being a designer? Like, what kind of draws you in every day, kind of makes you want to keep doing what you're doing?
I think it's probably just truly embracing, a client's problems as yours, so that when they have the moment, when they go, oh my gosh, and you actually see this is a person whose commute to work is transformed. And it's like, I could be happy that a solution was reached, but I'm truly happy for someone else. And I think the only way you get there is by truly embracing their pain as your own. Then you can experience their joy. I just remembered that I called myself Design Smurf, and this is going to be perpetually recorded on this. Forrest Young, a.k.a. Design Smurf. Is that it? All right. Thank you so much. Cheers.